What's up, guys? My name's Taylor Nemechek, and this is Who's That Saint? But first, ladies and gentlemen, Reginald, the liturgical recorder. Make sure to comment below the name of the tune. Think, praise, and worship. Alright, and now let's jump into today's saint. So this episode is special because today the young woman we are going to talk about was an unlikely candidate for sainthood in the eyes of the world. This young, ordinary woman didn't found a religious order or write groundbreaking books, or reach heights in the church. She hardly knew anything about theology and the faith, but what she did know was that she had God as a companion, and she built an extremely strong relationship with him. So the saint we're going to be talking about today is Saint Germaine Cousins. So the question is, who is Saint Germaine Cousins? Germaine was born in the year of 1579 in France, and her mother had died while she was still just a baby, so her father, Laurent, married a woman by the name of Hortense, who just absolutely despised Germaine. And Germaine had been born extremely weak, ill, and with a deformity in her right hand that left it paralyzed. And Hortense, all through Germaine's childhood, would do pretty much absolutely anything to make Germaine's life as miserable as possible. She would starve Germaine to the extent that she learned to crawl to the dog bowl so that she would have just simple measles amount of food to eat. And Hortense would even pour boiling water on Germaine's legs. And even once, while tending chickens, Hortense left her in a drain and somehow forgot about Germaine for 3 days. Throughout all this, Germaine's father did nothing, and he would just turn a blind eye and act like nothing was going on. And because of all this cruelty, Germaine got more weak and ill and developed the disease known as scrofula, which is a type of tuberculosis that causes neck glands to swell. And along her neck where the swelling was taking place, she also developed sores that made her immune system much more vulnerable to other diseases. And one would think this would make her stepmother, pity her a little bit, but instead it just made her hate Germaine all the more. Germaine's siblings, seeing what Hortense was doing to her, started to join in on this cruelty, and so what they'd do is they'd put ashes in the little bits of food that Germaine would get. And instead of ridiculing her children, Hortense found this quite enjoyable and would pretty much just egg them on to do this. And after a while, Hortense finally became concerned with Germaine's sickness, but it wasn't because of the health or the well-being of Germaine. It was because she feared that her own children would catch the diseases that Germaine had. So Hortense sent Germaine out to the barn, and that's where she slept and that's where she lived. And the only food that she got were the scraps that were for the animals. And on winter nights, her only warmth was the woolly sheep that also resided in the barn. After a while, Germaine was entrusted to take care of the sheep. No one expected her to have any use for education, so she spent long days out in the fields with only the sheep. And in her lonely life, she found a companion in God. She didn't know any theology and only knew the very, very basics of the faith. But she had a rosary that was made of knots, and she would pray simple prayers. One of her simple prayers was, "Dear God, please don't let me be too hungry or too thirsty. Help me to please my mother, and help me to please you." It was through these simple and very heartfelt prayers that a deep faith and trust in God was formed. And without fail, she would make daily Mass. Every day she would leave the sheep to God's care in the fields, and this shocked the villagers because the sheep were left alone and they were not attacked by wolves. But God's protection never failed Germaine. And one day, it had been raining for so long that the river was so full that it was to the point of flooding, and there was a villager that saw the river part so that Germaine could cross to get to the church in time. Even though Germaine had so little, she shared what she did have with others. Her food scraps, as little as they were, would be given to beggars a lot of the times. And her life of prayer became stories of God that totally captivated the village children. Most shocking of all was the forgiveness she showed to the woman who deserved really nothing but hatred. And Hortense, enraged at the stories she was hearing of Germaine's holiness, was just constantly on watch for Germaine to do something wrong. And one day, after throwing out a beggar that Germaine had let sleep in their barn, Hortense saw Germaine carrying something bundled in her apron, and thinking that she had stolen some bread to give to that beggar, she started to chase and scream at Germaine. And as Hortense began to beat her, Germaine opened her apron and out tumbled these really bright and beautiful flowers that no one was expecting to see for several months because it was in the middle of winter right now. And no one had any idea where she had found these vibrant blossoms in the middle of all the ice and snow. But there was only one answer, and Germaine gave this as she handed one of the flowers to her mother and said, "Please accept this flower, Mother. God sends it to you in sign of his forgiveness." As the whole village began to talk about Germaine's holiness, even Hortense began to soften her feelings towards her. She even invited Germaine back into the house, but she declined the offer, having become used to the straw bed she used in the barn. And it was in this straw bed that she was found dead at the age of 22 in the year of 1601. And even with all this evidence of her holiness, Germaine had too simple of a life to mean much beyond the small village that she lived in. But God had a plan. 40 years after Germaine's death, her body was exhumed, and it was found to be undecayed, which is known as being incorrupt. And it's almost like God was sending us a reminder that there's much more than just our outward beauty of a person. With her body being found incorruptible, the village she had lived in began again to speak of what she had been like and done, and quickly miracles were being attributed to her intercession, and so the canonization process for her began. And her feast day is on June 15th, and she is the patron saint of victims of child abuse. So there's our answer to who is Saint Germaine Cousin. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope you learned something you didn't already know about the moving story of this great saint. Make sure to subscribe and hit the like button, and comment below any saints you would like to see on future episodes. And as always, make sure to stay tuned for next week's episode of Who's That Saint? See you next time. God bless.